Hey guys, this week I'm going to be doing more chassis modifications, this time to the front suspension. So of course it's going to involve some DIY homemade parts again, and this time it's for the front anti-roll bar. So please stay tuned.
Garage time.
So if you remember, my car is a 1974 and it came from the factory fitted with a under the body sway bar. It's a one-piece design, attaches directly to the front suspension arms. Now I want to convert it to a through the body sway bar as was done in the earlier cars. And the reason being is that the through the body sway bar has additional adjustability. The drop links that go between the sway bar and the suspension arm can be made to be adjustable, and that's useful for things like corner balancing when you're trying to dial in the forces on each of the wheels. And also that arm that attaches to the sway bar can be made to be adjustable, and that means by attaching the drop links in different locations, you can change the roll stiffness of the front, which is going to improve tunability. So whether it's understeer, oversteer, you can dial that out with the front suspension bar, and also the rear suspension bar will also be adjustable. So that's what I'm after today. Of course, I need to make some modifications to the car to accept the through the body, and I'm going to do that now, but I'm going to take this fender off so I have a little more access. So this is really becoming a game of, what can Tom find next to work on his car without doing any more sanding? And there is a lot of truth to that, but my goal is to get as much of the suspension modifications and chassis modifications done so that I'm not working on top of a freshly painted car. So there is some method to the madness, but of course, sanding is not my favorite, as you know. You can see the areas that have been seam welded, and of course it's gotten a little rusty, so I need to clean this up as well while I'm in here. This is the location where the through the body sway bar goes, so that's the area that I'm going to be working on. And once I get that welded up, I'll clean up all these exposed raw metal and get it treated so it doesn't rust anymore. Okay, so I have removed the undercoating over the torsion bar area, and Porsche was nice enough to, leave these depressions from the earlier years. This is as it was in the earlier years. There's just not the hole here, and then there are no bolts, or there's no holes and nuts on the backside. So I need to drill the hole here and add the three nuts that go on the backside. I'm going to make a plate for that. And then this area is prone to cracking, especially on the earlier cars that have either stiffer anti-roll bars or they have stiffer bushings in here. The up and down forces on this can actually tear this metal. So it's smart to put a nut plate on the backside and then make a reinforcement plate to tie it into the walls. There's a vertical wall right here, so we can weld to that. Here you can see where my seam welds have come through. So there's the gas tank shelf right here. And then underneath here is the gas tank lateral supports. So if we make a plate that can tie all of these walls together, that force will be distributed from the strengthening plate to these wall sections, and it will prevent it from cracking. I'm also going to remove this, this brake part because I want the wall to extend down and get into this area too. So this is kind of in my way. Okay, now a friend let me borrow this piece. This is from an earlier car. This is a cover plate for the anti-roll bar. His car was a T, it didn't have roll bars. So I have this piece, and I'm just gonna transfer the holes from here, which are the factory holes, onto the sheet metal so I can drill them out and put some nuts on the back. Okay, now I have this clear template, and I'm going to try to come up with a shape that works well as a strengthening plate. This is a little freaky. This is the second time I came up with this shape, and it turns out to be the shape of the Porsche crest. That's totally random. I was really trying to get it to, look somewhat symmetrical and also, contact those three walls. Okay, this is iteration 2 on this template. And I have it here. Yeah, so that's the shape I came up with. And I did leave enough room on the bottom here for that, you can see where the brake line bracket was. I'm gonna leave room so I can put that brake line bracket back on top of this one. Now, I cannot just weld this plate on and call it good, because if you'll notice, the factory had done some depressions here so that this surface is vertical. And that's important. You can see it's pushed in on top and it's pulled out on the bottom. So it's important that the bearing that goes on here is perpendicular to the shaft of the anti-roll bar. Plan is to cut out this triangular portion from the center of this. So there's going to be an outer plate that's going to tie in the strengthening plate to these three walls I mentioned. And then the inner plate is going to be a triangle plate that's going to come here. And then the two are going to be welded together along the edges, so I can maintain that vertical wall. This tape is what you do when you cut it too small and you want to make it bigger. Rather than start with a new piece of paper, I just add tape to the edges. Okay, I've put some weld-through primer on the back side of this plate. This is the plate that's going to get welded onto the car. And as you saw, the car has some weld-through primer as well. Now I'm going to punch a couple holes in here, random holes, so that I can plug weld through those to give it a little bit more strength. I was able to get some welds around the perimeter so that this plate is going to be in its final position. But I'm not going to weld all the way around yet because there's no hurry to get that done. I want to make the plate that goes inside this triangular hole, and I'm going to clamp that in place. But before I can clamp that in place, I need to get the nuts on the back side. So rather than just weld the nuts directly to this plate, I'm going to make my own nut plate so that it gives it additional support and it's easier to weld. So we're moving right along. I have these weld nuts, and I'm going to be welding these on the back of this plate. So I have this particular one clamped in place, and I have it lined up. The holes are all lined up, and I adjusted the holes so they're exactly in the same place as this factory cover. So this means that even if I go with an aftermarket sway bar attachment, or anyone should be able to interface with this nut plate. So it should work out fine. So now it's just time to weld these on. I think I'll use the TIG welder for this. And then definitely still have to put the hole in the middle. Okay, so this fits pretty well. I got the weld nuts here on the back side, and they're not coming off. Okay, now I have the nut plate clamped on the back side, and I got the holes aligned up in the middle. And now it's time to make a plate that's going to go in this section. So this plate is going to be flat, and it's going to be at a different angle than this plate. And that's why I'm making it in two pieces. The factory put in these little bosses, and I don't want to lose these because that is the indicator of where the center should be. So I'm going to make a plate that kind of goes around these little bosses. Okay, while I'm waiting for that Weld Thru primer to dry that I just sprayed, that black paint, I made these wooden blocks. Now, this is 1 inch thick MDF, and I drilled this center hole with my drill press. And these are mock-up bearing carriers for the anti-roll bar. So I don't actually have the roll bar or the bearing carriers that would go on a car like this. And I'm probably going to make my own carriers anyways out of CNC'd aluminum. But these are here to mock up the bar, because what I want to do, I want to make sure that the carriers are perpendicular to the bar. So I have this metal bar, and these will slide on like this. So I can put this through the car, and I'm really trying to make sure that this bearing carrier is perpendicular to the roll bar. So by putting this on both sides like this, I can put it in the car as if it was the real sway bar, and then bolt it all together and then weld it after it's all orthogonal to this bar. That's the plan anyways. Okay, it's a little dark in here, but now I'm in the gas tank area, and there is the bar, and you can see the nut plate there on the back side. So the bar is traveling over to the other side, and ideally it would go straight through the hole on the other side, which I haven't drilled yet. But I can already tell the bar is not, it's not horizontal, and it's aiming a little bit towards the passenger's feet. So the alignment is not perfect, so that's why I didn't want to weld it in without knowing. I didn't show all the fabrication on this side, but I've completed to the same level that I did on the other side with these plates. These plates are there to strengthen it and hold that temporary bearing carrier. So let me show you what I've done to the inside. This temporary sway bar is in place, and it's going through the body, just like it did on the previous years, all the way to the other side. Now I managed to get this to line up so it's perpendicular to the carrier bearing. Okay, this wasn't, as I showed you earlier, this wasn't completely in line. So this is a piece of wood. I wasn't able to bend it too much with the wood, but I was able to kind of hammer the bolts and get this so that it is lined up. So now that things are lined up, I'm going to get this to poke through the other side, and then it's time to weld this all the way around. Okay, so I'm happy with the alignment now of both of these plates. So there's an outer plate and an inner plate. I have it aligned up with this, wooden donut, and it's going all the way through to the other sides. Okay, I was able to get some decent welds on this outer perimeter of the larger plate, and I did get some welds down underneath here too. But this mocked up wooden carrier piece is taking up too much space, so I can't actually get to this weld here on the top. So I'm going to take this off and grind it back a little bit so I can get my welder in there. It's probably not going to go anywhere because I got a big weld here on the side and a big weld here on the bottom. But I want to get at least one more weld on top before I take it off and weld all the way around. That wooden block got a little toasty, but I'm going to take it off now. But before I do, I just want to double check that it's still square in that direction. So that's the whole point of using these mock-up pieces, is to get this welded in so it's perpendicular. Excellent. Okay, that's a lot of welding. Once again, it's my overkill method. Oop, I forgot a hole in the bottom. Okay, I'm just going to talk about the welding a little bit right here. So this section right here, it sort of looks like the stack of dimes. A lot of people try to get this look. And for me, it's not about the appearance. It really, that start-stop technique, you probably can see in the video, it's a lot of short bursts, and that's what gives it the stack of dime appearance. But the reason why I had to do it here is because this metal is extremely thin. This is probably 20 gauge, maybe 22 gauge. It's really, really thin. And this is 16 gauge. It's a lot thicker. So in order to prevent it from just blowing through here, I had to kind of bridge both sides. And so I was zigzagging around and had to stop when I got to this section. So then I start again, and then I stop, and then I start again, and then I stop. That's how I got that appearance. But it was really there. The only reason why I did it is to prevent from blowing through. And also up here, you notice I missed a spot, and that is intentional because I want an opening on the top of this because I'm going to fill this entire cavity with a cavity wax or a penetrating oil. That's going to prevent this from rusting again in the future because it's overlapped metal. Okay, here's the final product. You can see, especially from this angle, you can see the differing angles or different planes that this mount is attached to the inner fender. This has been ground down. It's good enough to put the undercoating over it. I will be putting some epoxy primer down before undercoating. Also, I decided not to weld the nut plate on the back side. It's going to be easier for me to prep this with epoxy primer and get the back sides without having to worry about it rusting from the inside out. So even though it's a slight inconvenience to have to reach inside and hold this plate in position, I think overall it's better for longevity. This is the passenger side, and I didn't show much work on this area because this side of the shop isn't as well lit, but it's 100% welded in, just needs to be kind of ground smooth and prepped for the epoxy primer. Okay, so you saw this technique was a little different than some people just put a big plate over the whole area. I did it in 2 different plates, and the reason why is that I didn't want any binding to occur in the anti-roll bar, and I wanted to reduce friction in that pivot. So by making sure it's perpendicular to the sway bar, I have a feeling that it's going to reduce some of the friction in the roll bar, and that's what I was after. If you're using the factory rubber bushings, it's probably not a big deal, but I'm going to experiment with some hard materials, either nylon or sintered bronze, just to see how it is. Now I'm probably going to machine, like I mentioned, my own bearing carriers, and I'll probably make 2 sets, one with a larger, more compliant bushing, and then one that's a pretty rigid bushing, and see if I can tell the difference. But that was kind of a different technique. Instead of forming that shape in the raw single sheet of flat steel, I kind of used the welder to get it in the position and then shaping it with that grinder. A little bit different technique. I think for this application, this worked really well. Since I didn't have to guess what angle to form into the flat sheet, I could just true it up with that mock-up piece and then weld it, and now it's straight or perpendicular from side to side. So I hope you found that useful. I still got a huge mess to clean up, but that's another project in the done column. We'll see you next week.